So, Brian, we've kind of given our overview of everything that's gone on with the class, initial thoughts overall, what it means for the team moving forward. Now let's kind of break down and
Yeah.
what you think of everybody individually.
Yeah, and we'll kind of go through what we'll do is we'll go through offense first, and then defense. I'll give an overall grade of the class as a whole, then the offensive grade. Then I'll go position by position and give grades of the position group, and then within that, I'll kind of talk about each player. So I'm gonna give you guys a lot of stuff here. So I'm gonna just spew a lot out. Trev, you know me, I'm gonna get on a roll. So if you want to interject, just cut me off. Right. And or just give me some signal and let me know if you want to add anything. Cause you know me, once I get rolling on recruiting, I just get rolling. You know what I mean?
You got it.
But overall class, somebody asked in the chat, and I'll say it here is how do you evaluate this class? And to me, I grade this class overall as a top 8 to 10 type of class. It may be 6, it may be 12. It's like with anything else. You know, sometimes the number 10 class in the country is a legit number 10 class. Sometimes a number 10 class a year before would have been 6th. Sometimes a number 10 class the next year is going to be 13th. It just depends on the quality of the overall. It's like every year the number 10 team in the country at the end of the year is not always the same exact type of team. Some years the number 10 team's really good, just a great year, a lot of good teams. Sometimes the number 10 team's a team that's not that good, but there weren't a lot of good teams, right? So it's a in that 8 to 10 range. A lot of impact talent, a lot of meeting numbers, meeting needs, a lot of depth, 25-man class. You literally hit impact players on offense, special teams, and offense, defense, and special teams, right? So it's an 8 to 10 caliber class. It needed a little bit more. It needed a more high-level quarterback, more impact talent at receiver, and more impact talent in the D-line to jump up higher, in my opinion. At a lot of positions, this is an elite top 5 class. Offensive line, tight end, linebacker, secondary, place kicker. But D-line, quarterback, and receiver are very important positions. And when you're not quite at that level at those positions, it's going to drag you down a little bit. And when I mean drag you down, it drags you down from 5 to like 8 to 10 range, right? It doesn't drag you down to like 19. And that's how I see that class. And I think this class is going to be very undervalued because of the fact that there's not enough people that have graded Nolan James properly. Although one of the recruiting services, I believe 247, recently jumped him also into their top 247 in their top ranking and made him a 4-star. But they're the only ones that did. They have him now number 223. So props to them for grading him correctly. When he committed to Notre Dame, they had him as the number 471 player in the country. And he jumped all the way up to 223, which is within range of, I have him a little bit higher, but it's within range. So, you know, props to them. I give them a hard time, you know, and just, but they got a couple of these right. But I look at just, you know, I think guys like, I think Elijah Burris is being undervalued. I've said that from the beginning. I think that a guy like Christopher Burgess is kind of right there by most. Some have him too low. I think a guy like Dom Hulak is being undervalued. I think Jadon Blair is way undervalued by everybody other than On3. They have him as the number 54 player in the country. 247 has it 157. That's way too low. ESPN has him at 219, way too low, and Rivals dropped him out of their top 300 completely, which is just, or their top 250 completely, which is ridiculous. So if he was great, if he was evaluated properly, and if Dallas Golden and Mark Zachary were evaluated properly, then I think this class would be graded much differently. And I've been saying this for a while. You know, people say, well, you know, Ohio State's got a much better DB class. No, they don't. Just because those guys are graded higher doesn't mean they're better. And then Ohio State just lost Naheem Offord today, by the way, their 5-star corner, who was pretty good. But I look at Mark Zachary, and Rivals dropped him out of their top 250. He's 220 on ESPN, 175 on 247, 111 on On3. On3 is much closer for him. Rivals has Dallas Golden at number 66, which is fine. It's a little low, but it's in that range. But he's 132 on On3, 247 has him at 163, and ESPN is at 149. Those guys are both surefire, easy top 100 players. So, like, when we look at a secondary class, we say, well, this is an elite secondary class. Nationally, they don't view it that way because they have Jadon Blair too low. They have Mark Zachary too low. And they have like Rivals has Dallas Golden at 66, which is fine. I'd have him a little higher, but 66 is fine. If I have you as a top 50 player and somebody puts him in the number 66, I'm like, oh my God, you missed him so bad. He's top 50. That's within range. It's fine. But then they have Mark Zachary and Jadon Blair outside of their top 250. So they're going to miss on the class. They have Creed Thomas as an unranked 4-star. They have Ethan Long. I think they dropped him down to a 3-star, I believe. So they're missing the boat on how good the secondary class is. And so that's my issue is and we've had this conversation before. We tried to tell everybody last year that Leonard Moore was a dude. We tried to tell people about Benjamin Morrison the year before. The national recruiting services have yet to come around on the fact that nobody evaluates defensive back talent right now better than Mike Mickens does. And it's kind of like it used to be when the D lineman would commit to Bama or O lineman commits to Notre Dame, all of a sudden their ranking gets a bump because they just get the benefit of the doubt. Mike Mickens needs to be there because you talk to Notre Dame people, and of course we do, and I know when Ryan and I were still doing recruiting shows and stuff and still breaking stuff down when these kids committed, we had them both as top 50 players, and they still are.
Yeah.
So it's an elite secondary class, but it's not going to be viewed that way, which is why the class is lower than it should be. And so that's why you see rankings of them outside the top 10. That's fine. You can focus on that. That's all good. But it's going to be another class like we've seen in the past that is going to end up being a lot better in college than they were when they signed. And I'm excited about that. Because unlike past years where they took some guys early that weren't that good, they kind of processed those guys out this year. Now, I don't love that. I'm not a big fan of that. But a lot of those guys that were going to drag the class down kind of got processed out a little bit. And it raised the level of the class quite a bit, in my opinion. And again, I view it as in the top 8 to 10 class. There's room for improvement. It could have been better, and it should have been better. I mean, if and I'll say it again, I'll save it for the position groups, but there's a couple spots where if they would have taken guys that we think they could have got, we're having a very different conversation right now. So overall, class, Trev, I give it, and that's looking at my grade, that's an A- class overall. Because the way I do grades, it's A is elite to college football playoff caliber. B is outstanding top 15 caliber. When I think college football playoff, I don't think you're making it at 12. It's more of you're a quarterfinals, semifinals, that type of class, right? And B is outstanding top 15 caliber class. C is a solid borderline top 25 caliber group. It could either be class or group. D is subpar, just substandard of what it should be. Then F is a disaster, and I've literally not given Notre Dame an F in a very long time because, those years when they didn't sign a guy at a position they needed a position, you're going to kind of get an F there. When Jonathan McAllister's your best defensive end target, you're going to get a pretty low grade there. So that's kind of where they're at with that. So overall, I give this class an A-. It's not quite that elite top 5 to 7 type of group, but in that 8 to 10, that's an A-, B+ range. It's a very good class. Can get better, but it's a very good class. So that's the overall view of the class.
Okay. No, I like that. So, and then just to recap, to make sure that I'm on the same page as you, for it to make that jump higher than that 8 to 10 range, probably a little bit better efforts in quarterback recruiting, wide receiver recruiting, D-line recruiting, or maybe not better efforts. Maybe that's not the best word.
Results. Better results. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Receivers one, defensive tackle specifically is another one.
Okay.
And, and quarterback was good. I mean, quarterback's good, but I like Blake Hebert. I'll break him down in a minute, but he's not a top, I have him graded out as a top 250 guy, not a top 100 guy. I had Kenny Minchie's a top 100 guy. CJ Carr is a 5-star.
Right.
He's a good football player with a very high ceiling, but he needs a lot more development than those other guys did. And so I like the pickup, but it's not a pickup where I say they're a top 5 class because of him.
Right.
He's more of that guy that ends up being better in college potentially than he was as a prospect. And there's guys like that, we've talked about them in the past. We're like Boubacar was that way. We graded Boubacar pretty low from a ranking standpoint coming out of high school because he was super raw. He had been banged up a lot, but we said, boy, the upside is elite. Well, that means he's got a chance to be a better college player than maybe he was a high school player. Whereas a guy like Gerby Lambert, guys like, Charles Jagasol, guys like CJ Carr, like they're 5 stars coming out and they've got 5-star upside, or top 50 guys coming out with 5-star upside. Kingston was that way. Drake was that way. Jaden Osbury was that way. And you're seeing them some of those guys already panning out to be that good.
Right.
Leonard Moore was a guy that had 4.5 star upside grade. That's of a top 50 player. And so that's kind of where that's at. But overall, Trev, A- B+, do better at quarterback, as you mentioned, do better at wide receiver, do better, especially with D tackles. But, one more really twitchy edge rusher would have been things that would have vaulted this up into the top 5.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's dive in then. Let's dive into the individual position groups. And we had already mentioned Blake Hebert, which makes a pretty good transition, man. So let's dive into Blake Hebert as a player, how he did in high school, just his impact on this class and everything. So, Bryan, take it away with the lone quarterback in this class.
So we'll go positions I have at Trevor, and at the end I'll give the offensive grade at the end. So quarterback, I give it a B-. Right now, that means, as I said, B is outstanding to top 15 caliber, and then obviously the closer you get to being an A, the closer you get to being a C, it'll determine the B-, the plus, right? So I give it a B-. And I give it a B- because I have Blake Hebert as a top 250 guy, 4-star top 250 player. Like the tools. He's a big-armed kid, great frame. He's like 6'3", 215. Maybe he's 6'2", 6'2 and a half. That's fine. But he's thick-built kid. You see the well-built lower body. He's got a pretty good sized upper body. He's a well-put-together kid. He's going to be 220 plus at some point in time. He's a quality athlete. He's a guy that you can legitimately call run plays for. You're not going to build your run game around him like you do Riley Leonard. But some of the short yardage stuff that Notre Dame does with Riley Leonard, he can do. He can pull a backside read zone and take off and run and pick up 15, 20 yards. And if you give him a crease or you make a mistake, he can take it to the house. Like I said, not a guy that you're going to necessarily have be doing as much as Riley Leonard, but you're going to be having him. He can do stuff that you're not going to be asking CJ Carr and Kenny Minchey to do as runners. They're more athletes that can scramble. They're not guys you're building your run game around. Like CJ Carr is a very good athlete. Kenny Minchey's a very good athlete. But they're not runners. They're pocket passers that can run, that can scramble and move around. This is a kid you can do some designed run game stuff. And in that regard, I actually kind of like the compliment to CJ Carr and Kenny Minchey. In that regard, he's a little different than they are. Like I said, big arm, playmaker in high school. He's just raw. And the B- grade comes from the fact that he is raw. His ball placement needs a lot of work because his footwork needs a lot of work. He's got a really nice, clean, compact, fast release that's not always consistent. At times, he'll kind of rush his delivery a little bit. He also does a lot where, and Trev, as a quarterback, you know exactly what this is going to cause. A lot of times when he throws, he steps on and locks his front foot or his front leg. And once you lock that front leg, you have now basically put a resistance into your hips, and it's going to slow down your whole throwing motion. A lot of times you want to get there and you drive off that back foot. If you're driving off your back foot, you can't lock your front foot. But he'll plant that lead foot and lock it, and then it just throws his whole motion off. And you'll see some throws, Trev, on film where he'll bang a 20-yard in cut, and you're like, wow. And then there's other times he'll throw a 15-yard in cut, and it just dies at the end. You're like, how do those two things happen? So you go back and you watch the film, and you see that he'll do that. Sometimes he'll like speed up the arm motion, and so he'll just kind of rush it, almost shot put it, and doesn't get that same torque into the throw. But a lot of times he's got a really nice base in the pocket, but he doesn't transition well from back to front. He actually goes right to the front. That front leg hits, it locks, and it just takes all the so like throwing it's like a baseball. It's like you get that torque. It's a very natural torque that comes from your hips up to your upper body, and that's how you get that snap on the ball. Even guys who are great at not setting their feet and throwing still have that upper body torque. They don't just go like this and don't move their body. They have that torque. Well, when you lock your front foot, it kind of drives into your hips, and it stops your hips, and so it stops that torquing motion. And it kind of makes you almost shot put because you can't drive on it. He'll do that, and you'll see the ball just kind of go down. once that gets cleaned up, and that's a relatively fresh, easy freshman year type of fix, and he starts kind of having a little bit more bend in his knees and starts driving off of that back for a little bit, you're going to see him be way more consistent just driving the football. And it also, more than anything, it kills his ball placement. Because if you're trying to lead a guy this way, you lock that front foot, you can't bring the rest of your body with you. And so you're going to end up releasing the ball back here instead of here, and that kills your ball placement. So those are things that you see from him. And like, he throws a great deep ball, but at times he'll dip that back shoulder a little bit too much and the ball just hang up a little bit. You know, you're going to have a little bit of a dip, but don't dip quite as much. Again, very easy freshman year fix. Those things all got to get fixed, though. Footwork's got to get fixed. He's a pretty smart kid. You can see him processing reads pretty well. But the mechanical things that lead to him making just making him less accurate than you want him to be is what drags his grade down. And then he also, like a lot of young quarterbacks, he's a smart kid, but at times he will lock into a read. And like, there was one play he had in high school where he literally catches the ball, looks that way, just turns and throws blindly a now screen, and the DB read it perfectly, steps in front of it, takes it back for a touchdown. Like, you got to have some awareness of what's being done. Part of that was a great read by the guy. There's just some things like that, and that'll cause some turnovers that you don't want. So those are things that you got to work through, but the tools are really impressive. And so he grades out as a 4-star player, top 250 caliber kid with a 4.5-star upside grade. And just a reminder what that is. 5 stars, top 25 on my system. 4.5 stars, sort of that top 50 to 75 range. And then 4-star is more of that top 100 to 250 range. And then 3.5 stars, like top 350 to 400, and 3 stars, like a top 500 to lower kind of guy. And so I give 2 grades for those who are kind of new to what we do here. I give a grade of where they are right now. Just, this is your grade for right now. And then there's the upside grade that is, this is what your ceiling can be if you fill out, if you improve mechanically, whatever the case may be, get more experience. Every kid has a different thing holding him back from his upside. Some kids are 4 stars now with 4-star upside grade. Notre Dame doesn't recruit many kids like that. And so he is a top 250 guy that has 4.5-star upside, which means if the light goes on for Blake Hebert, he's got a chance to be really good. And so he's a B-, which is, again, that top 15-ish caliber player.
He has a good foundation for Mike Denbrock and Gino Guidugli to work with. I mean, the thing that jumps off the page for me is his arm strength. And I know that you touched on it, but I remember when he committed and we did a commitment video for him, or well, we did a show after his commitment to Notre Dame when he flipped from Clemson, and man, his arm strength is there. His arm strength is there. And if he can fix his front leg problem, because that's affecting his release point, that's why he'll sail some, that's why he'll drive some into the ground. But if that can get fixed and he starts to fix some of those mechanical errors, I think that he's going to add some good depth to the room. Him as a runner, I've seen a lot of people talk about how he's like just a straight up dual threat guy. I mean, he doesn't have like the same running ability as a Riley Leonard, but I could see him being used very similar to how, Kansas State used Will Howard, like a lot of stuff in the red zone and pulling a backside zone, not necessarily designing quarterback draws for him like what Denbrock is doing right now with Riley Leonard. But no, I'm excited. I'm excited to see what Blake Hebert can do. Excited to see what he can do, man. So let's move down to the running back, and we got Nolan James to talk about here, Bryan. So thoughts on him and what he's going to do for this class and what he's going to do at Notre Dame.
Dude, I love Nolan James. Like, this is one of the things that's not getting talked enough about because of recruiting rankings. And he's a guy that, I mean, you look at this kid, Trev, and you look at he reminds me a lot of what Audric Estime did as a senior. Like, I liked Audric as a junior, but he was a solid prospect, and Notre Dame thought he was just a solid prospect. That's why they didn't offer him and push for him, and why he committed to Michigan State. And he comes out his senior year, and he was a monster. He averaged like 8-9 yards a carry. He rushed for, I think, I have to find what his numbers were, but Audric had like just some crazy numbers, Trevor, where let me find this one. He ended up rushing as a junior. He rushed for 1,190 yards, 6.9 yards per carry, and 15 touchdowns in 5 games. As a senior in 8 games, because that was a COVID year, he rushed for 1,857 yards, 9.8 yards per carry, and 22 touchdowns. And if you know anything about the New Jersey football he plays in, that's really good football he's playing against. And he just went from like good player to monster. Now, Nolan's not quite what Audric was, but he had a similar jump this year at DePaul Catholic, Trevor, and just had an outstanding senior season. So in 2023, as a junior, he had 221 attempts for 1,422 yards, 6.4 yards per carry, 8 touchdowns, 23 catches for 193 yards and a touchdown. It's a pretty darn good season, especially when you know the level of competition. He plays against Bosco and Paramus Catholic and Seton Hall and St. Peter's Prep, where the Adamiolas were from, Brandon Wimbush was from. He plays really good football. And you look at his senior year production, Trevor, 243 attempts, 1,921 yards, jumped up to 7.9 yards per carry, 19 touchdowns, and had 27 catches for 340 yards and 4 touchdowns. Outstanding football player. And we talked about this when he committed. He's a really weirdly built kid, and I don't mean this as an insult, but he's got a much lower body than a lot of kids do. So like very short legs, which makes him a little harder to get on. That's why he's kind of really tough to bring down, but he's got all the running back tools you want, right? Like it's great to have foot quickness, which he has. He's a very sudden kid. He's very twitchy. He can be smooth when he needs to, but he's got a lot of suddenness to his game. He's got good open field speed. He can make big plays. There's no doubt about that. He's got a lot of, strength. He doesn't look that big, but he's really put together well. Notre Dame had him listed at 5'9", 200. It's about right. He reminds me a lot of Jadarian from a build standpoint, Trevor. But when you watch the running back traits, that's what separates him. And that's where I can understand why people are not as much in love with him. I understand it because he doesn't have the elite size, the elite 40, the elite, physical traits. He's got pretty good physical traits. He's got exceptional vision, which is a running back trait. His second level anticipation, which is the ability to kind of read what's happening and anticipate what's going to happen and make the proper cut, is exceptional. His ability to redirect and like guys can be quick, but like you watch a lot of guys leap players. We see that a lot now. I rarely see a guy that can do what Jeremiah Love does, which is leap that high and then hit the ground in running form and just go. That's a level of balance and agility that you just don't see a lot. And Nolan, I haven't seen him do the leaping thing, but his ability to jump cut and just plant and go is really good. His feel for the game is really good. As a sophomore, they actually used him a lot he was a running back and a slot receiver. So as a sophomore, he rushed 91 times for 625 yards and 8 touchdowns. He also caught 43 passes for 530 yards and 5 touchdowns. So he has that pass game background where he could come into Notre Dame and do what Aeneas Williams is doing, but he could also do what Jadarian Price is doing with not quite as much juice, right? Like I'm not going to say he's going to average 7.3 yards per carry like Jadarian did, but similar type of running style to Jadarian. But that's why Jadarian was a top 100 guy on my board, and this kid's a top 150 guy on my board because Jadarian had a little bit more juice. And that's the difference where Jadarian may take one for 70, Nolan takes it for 40. But he makes the same kind of reads. He's got that same kind of, like, you'll see, you look at Jadarian and he doesn't look elusive, but he is, and he's just got that, like, wow, I didn't notice how much of a cut that was. He's really hard to get a shot on. Nolan is very similar to Jadarian that way. Also low-built guy. He just doesn't have – what separates him from being a top 150 guy that I have him to a top 100 guy is just that elite explosiveness that Jadarian had, that Jeremiah Love had. Nolan doesn't have that, but he's a really good football player and can do a lot of different things. And he can fit any role you need him to play. Third down back, every down back, short yardage back. He can do it all. He's a very underrated football player. And going from Justin Thurman and Daniel Anderson to him was a big jump for the Notre Dame staff. Big jump.
The way that he's built and put together and how he runs, he does a really good job of getting his shoulder square when he runs. He does a really good job of that. And maybe it's just his build with him being, that 5'9", 200-pound guy. He reminds me a lot of that Kyron Williams, Blake Corum type of build, like low center of gravity. They're a guy that can kind of they can break it open, but they're not Jeremiah Love. They're not going to beat somebody in a foot race or beat an angle. But Nolan James, he reminds me a lot of that style of running back. And if my memory serves me correctly, Blake Corum and Kyron Williams did okay in college.
And I would argue he's more explosive than those two from a speed standpoint.
Yep.
But the build is similar to those guys, and the ability to just be sudden with your cuts, like you were talking about, Kyron is a very good comp. So I think Blake Corum's an even better comp because Kyron wasn't quite as powerful as Blake was. And I think Nolan is more powerful than Kyron was. So I think the Blake Corum comparison is a really good one. Trevor, I like that one as a comp. It's a really good comp.
Thanks. Well,
I wasn't saying that like I'm surprised. I just, it's a good job. It's a good job.
No, I appreciate you, man. I appreciate you. So moving along here, talking more offensive position groups. And I know this one's a little bit of a hot topic of discussion for some people, but let's dive into the wide receiver room and the recruits and the commits that they got signed today in the 2025 class, Bryan.
So I gave the running back grade a B. I forgot to say that. Quarterback a B minus. Running back receiver room, I give a C plus. Now, C plus for me is a solid group because my grade C, it's solid, borderline top 25. I have it a B as a C plus. So it's not a top 15 group because for a couple reasons. One, you did want 4. 3 is the number you needed. You needed 3, but you wanted 4. You worked hard to get 4 and you didn't get 4. That's going to bring it down a little bit as well. And as I said earlier, the one big thing about the class, and I'll get into each player individually, but as a whole, there's just no guy that right now that's a number 1. Now, maybe Antavius Richardson becomes that kind of guy. Maybe Elijah Burris becomes that kind of guy. Maybe Jerome Bettis surprises all and he becomes that kind of guy. But right now, none of those guys are that, either by being elite athletes or by being, 6'3", 215 and running a 4.5. They're just not that. There's no Kevin Austin in this class as a prospect. It also goes to show that not every guy that's way necessarily becomes that kind of dude. But we saw what Kevin Austin could do in his last year when he finally started to kind of figure it out a little bit and stayed eligible and all that kind of stuff. He was a pretty good football player. It's lacking that. And for me to have you as a top 10 or top 15 receiving core, you got to have at least one guy that you look at and say, I think he's a number 1. Now, I think they have a couple guys that could be number 1s, but right now there's a bit of a ways between where they are now and where they would need to be number 1s for different reasons. And so that's where we'll kind of get into the individual players. My highest graded receiver now on the current grade is Elijah Burris, who's a guy that, as you all know, I was very high on Elijah when they signed him, when they got a commitment from him. I thought Elijah was a guy that just has all the tools to be a really good college receiver. Yes, he lacks high-level speed, which is part of the reason he doesn't get a top 100 grade. I love his foot quickness. He's got great balance. He's got great route running instincts. He's a guy that's got excellent ball skills, very fluid hips. He can make the really tough back shoulder throws. He's got to get a lot stronger. He's a pretty skinny kid right now. He's got to get a lot stronger. And I hope that in college he has a little bit gets a little bit more burst. So I grade right now Elijah as a top 150 caliber prospect. He probably leans more to 175 and 200 than he does leaning towards the top 100. So if I miss, or he's going to be more 175 to 200 is where I have him now. I do have him as a 4.5 star upside grade because I think he's a guy that has the ability to go out and play that Z position and be that dynamic route runner that's just getting open on curls, getting open on comebacks, screwing you into the ground with a corner post route or a post corner route, or, just you think he's running a vertical and just snaps that dig off underneath and he gets that separation that way. And he's got excellent ball skills. He can catch the ball in traffic. He saw a huge jump in production this year, Trevor, and that was one of the things that was missing as well. He missed his sophomore year with an injury. Came back last year. They had a really good wide receiver committed or on this team who's, I think, also a Power 5 commitment. I forget who he's committed to, but he kind of was their number one guy. He was the number one guy the year before. Well, this year, Elijah started to become a little bit more of that, hey, get me the ball. You need to get me the ball type of guy. And he didn't really jump his catches a whole lot. He had 29 last year, but he went up to 37 this year. But his yardage went from 439 and 5 touchdowns to 962 and 15 touchdowns. And when you consider the fact he's got a Division I Power 5 receiver on the other side and a running back, because he's a high school teammate of Nolan James, who rushed for 1,900 yards, that's pretty good. And one thing I like about both Elijah Burris and Nolan James, Trev, is they were big game players. So you look at Elijah Burris this year, he goes for over 100 yards on Paramus Catholic. He goes for 2 catches and 97 yards and a touchdown against Good Counsel, who's one of the top programs in the state of Maryland, and a lot of times is ranked in the top 25. He had 4 catches for 132 yards and 2 touchdowns against Don Bosco Prep. And in the first 3 rounds of the playoffs, he went 2 for 84 and a touchdown, 3 for 90 and 5 for 87 and 2 touchdowns. And the reason he didn't do a whole lot in the state title game, 1 catch for 15 yards and went for a touchdown, is because there's this kid that they had on their team named Nolan James, who in the state title game carried the ball 29 times for 244 yards and 2 touchdowns. Nolan, here's a great stat for you, and I should have given you this in the last one. Nolan James in the playoffs this year, 4-game playoff, rushed for 653 yards, 8.1 per carry, and had 5 touchdowns in the playoffs. He went for at least 100 yards in every playoff game. The only one, his lowest output was 103. He had 2 touchdowns on 12 carries because they blew a team out 45-14. But Elijah Burris is similar. When they, in the big games against Don Bosco, which is their big rival, and in Paramus Catholic in the playoffs, these guys made plays, and that's something you look at when you're evaluating players and their intangibles. Okay, you put up good numbers, but in the 2 biggest games of the years, you did nothing. You got shut out. These kids aren't that way. And that's something I praise Jeremiah Love for when they signed him, because his best game of his career was the state title game. He went for 300 yards. You're like, that's a money player. You look at Jeremiah Love had almost 1,000 yards in the playoffs in his senior year. That's what you want. And then guess what? Look what he's done in college. Big games, Jeremiah steps up, and he doesn't play that great against Florida State, but you go play Army the next week, 2 weeks later, go play USC on the road, and he's balling. And that's kind of how he is. And these 2 kids have a little bit of that as well.
It's kind of that unsung trait that you look for. Like, Marcus Freeman, you've brought up before, Bryan, that Marcus Freeman is now recruiting guys that kind of have that intangible piece. Now, obviously, it's something that could be tracked on the stat sheet, right? We just rattled off what Nolan James did, what Jeremiah Love did, what Burris did in, playoffs, high school, postseason. But, for me, it's about getting to like situational football and what you're going to do when the lights are the brightest. And I think that is an unsung piece where, in years past under a different regime, you might not have gotten that many guys. And the guys that you did get that were like that were the big time gamers. You know what I mean? So I think that's a huge, huge unsung trait. And I'm happy that that's what the staff has been looking for.
They also signed Scrap Richardson, who is a very intriguing guy. He is the polar opposite of Elijah Burris. He's a kid that has probably a higher ceiling. He's taller. He's faster. He's ran a 10.68. He's got timed as a 10.68 in the 100-meter dash, which is pretty good for a high school kid who's not a track guy. He just runs track. Doesn't make him a track guy. Dynamic athlete, really explosive with the ball in his hands. And Elijah brings some of that to the table as well. He's not just a catch the ball and get tackled guy. He's got some after the catch ability as well. But this is the kind of kid you say, let's get the tunnel screen thrown to this kid. Let's throw the go ball to this kid. Let's get down the field to this kid. He brings that kind of athleticism, but you don't know what kind of receiver he's going to be because he plays quarterback and defensive back in high school. But that's also one of the things I love about him, because I was talking with somebody today. It's like, look, I mean, I've taken kids at the level I coached at as freshman quarterbacks, and I had a kid named Michael O'Brien at Christopher Newport that was a high school quarterback. He came in, got in my rotation, caught like 10 plus balls as a freshman. And if you can coach the position, you can get a kid, an athlete like that ready to go. Well, maybe not the first year, but definitely by year 2. But if you're a good enough coach and you have the need, you can get him ready by his first year if the kid has the proper work ethic. And so we're going to find out if this young man's willing to put in the work. That's certainly a question mark, but there's a lot of tools there to work with. And that's the thing is, I always had this philosophy as a receivers coach, Trev, is I want I want athleticism. Give me the tools. Like if you've got the tools, if you're a kid that can run, if you've got the hips, if you've got the feet, if you've got, great body control, if you've got length, I can teach you how to play wide receiver, right? If you've got those tools. And you have to have some level of catching the ball. I don't know that Scrap, how he's going to be with ball skills, but in my experience, quarterbacks tend to have really good ball skills and really good hands. I made the transition at this lower level from a quarterback my whole life to receiver. And I think in my third high school game playing receiver, I set the school's touchdown record with 5. You know what I mean? So like if you're an athlete and you can learn the position if you can catch, and most quarterbacks can catch, they have good hands. We got to see it, right? We got to see how he tracks the ball. We don't know how he's going to track the ball down the field. We don't know how he's going to handle back shoulders. We don't know how he's going to be in traffic going over the middle. There's a lot of those things we don't know, which is why his grade is not as high. Like I have him as a top 250 guy. And actually, let me check my grade. I think that's what I have him as. Let me see what my grade is for him. I have him as top 250 player. So 4-star, top 250. So below Elijah, but that's all based off his athletic tools. His entire grade is based off his athletic ability and what he does with the ball in his hands, which is really good. What we don't know about him is, does he have the receiver traits? Like with Elijah, good athlete, not elite athlete, but he's got all the receiver traits you want. Great ball skills, route running, feel for the game, all that. With Antavius, he's 6'2", he's got a really outstanding athletic skills. He's long, he's fast, he's elusive, and we know what he can do with the ball in his hands. And we also know he's tough. And we see that as a runner, but you also see that on defense. This is a kid who could legitimately play in the secondary for Notre Dame if you needed him to. Like, he's that good of a defensive back. But you need him at receiver. But it's like, okay, but I don't know what receiver traits he has. Tracking the ball, route fielding, feel for getting open as a route runner. Usually quarterbacks tend to end up being pretty good at that, Trevor, because they understand, I know what I would want you to do when I'm scrambling or when I'm working open, but there's just a lot of those things we don't know, and that's why the grade is a little bit lower. But he does have another guy that's got a 4.5-star upside grade. And he's also a guy that is also someone else who is getting a little bit of a love for his senior year production. I know that actually, let me pull it up. I believe it was On 3 or 247. Yeah, On 3 and 247 both have him as a 4-star top 300 player. On 3 has him as number 287. 247 has him at number 214, and ESPN also jumped him up to a 4-star. That's not getting talked about by Notre Dame fans who have convinced themselves that this is a bad receiver class. I just told you two guys that don't take my word for it. If you think, well, you're a Notre Dame, cool. Well, 247 is not at all pro Notre Dame, like not even a little bit. And they have 2 of Notre Dame's receivers as 4-star top 250 guys. And On 3, who I don't think is pro Notre Dame, anti Notre Dame. I just, they have misses like everybody else. They have positions they're not good at. Some they're whatever. My beef with On 3. They also have this kid as a 4-star top 300 player. ESPN has 3 of the 4 recruiting services have this kid as a 4-star player. So that's what I keep saying, Trevor. Like, this is just because you never heard of him, and because he wasn't ranked high when they got him, and they flipped him from South Florida. And I think that's what kind of rubbed people the wrong way, where if you look at it, you say, boy, this is a dynamic athlete from Georgia that the recruiting services are now giving love to, post Notre Dame commitment, by the way. Then, and you look at what he does with the ball and say, like, that's a really good pickup. It's not getting talked a lot about. This is a good football player. And you're starting to see more people coming around on Elijah as well, except Notre Dame fans, because they've kind of locked in on he was a 3-star when he committed, and that's just kind of what he is. That's why I say this is a much better recruiting class, receiver class than people give it credit for. But I'm also not going to jump on the train of I'm excited because it's signing day and say, let's give him an A. You know what I mean? Like, there's work to be done. Elijah's got to get stronger. Elijah's got to, get a little bit more burst. He's got to learn the game a little bit to a degree, but a lot of tools. Scrap's got all the athleticism. He's got to learn how to play the position. And then with Jerome, who went from a 3-star player, like top 500 type of guy, not really sure he should be offered Notre Dame, and the only reason he got the scholarship is because his name's Jerome Bettis Jr., to a guy where if his name was Jerome Anderson and his dad drove a UPS truck, like my dad did, then you're like, okay, it's a good football player. Like, okay, it's a bit of a risk, but this kid's got some tools. And I did not feel that watching Jerome as a junior. I thought this is Jerome Bettis' kid, and that's why he's at Notre Dame. I'm just going to be honest. You watch the senior year, Trev, and you're like, this kid got a lot better. And I already talked about, did I earlier give his, did I go over his numbers jump? Did I do that earlier?
I don't think numbers jump. We just talked about skill set on the
Okay.
field, what he improved on.
Yeah, let me give you his numbers jump as well, because Jerome, as a junior, Jerome caught in 14 games, caught 30 passes for 369 yards and 4 touchdowns. And as a senior, he caught 36 passes for 630 yards. So he went from 12.3 per catch to 17.5 in 7 touchdowns. And he's also a kid that had 47 tackles on and 2 interceptions and 2 forced fumbles on defense. So, this is a kid who the number jumped. He was a little bit more smooth. He comes off the line better. His ball skills have always been good. Like, that's the one thing Jerome always had, is that kid could catch the stinking football. And he was a great red zone weapon, because you could see him in camps. Guys would be covering all over him. You still put that ball up and Jerome's going to go get it. That's the one thing he could do, is catch the football. He just wasn't going to get any separation, and there's still some issues there. But you watch him as a senior, guys, and if you remember the board, I actually put all the highlight videos in one thread. There's a couple that I don't have senior film up, so I put their junior film, but like all 25 of the signees, even the kicker, there's a thread on the message board in the Champions Lounge that I put all their videos. So it's not links to it, but it's literally embedded in the thread. You can watch all their film. And if you watch Jerome's highlight film, and you can see it in game film too, you're going to see a much better athlete. We never saw Jerome really stretching the field as a junior and a sophomore. He's catching post routes, go routes. He's doing all that stuff as a senior, and he's also a two-way player. So his grade improved, Trev. He actually, not only did he jump up from a 3-star to a 3.5-star, but he's closer to being a 4-star now than he is to being a 3-star on my system, on my grading system. That's how much he improved. Nobody on offense went higher in their ranking than him, based off improvement. Will Black went up simply because, as I said, I kind of had a little bit of an incomplete grade on him because of a lack of film. So Will Black, that's what really resulted in his. This is more of Jerome. I had plenty of film on Jerome, and that's what I thought of him. And now I have senior year film of Jerome, and it's changed completely to where you're now like, dude, that's your number 3 receiver. Okay, that's not a bad group. So that was also something, because honestly, Trev, if we're being real, open about this, when he was committed based off junior film, they had 3 receivers in the class, but in my opinion, they really had 2. I'm just being honest. Now, after watching this kid's film, you're like, okay, they got 3 receivers in this class, like 3 legit Notre Dame-ish caliber players in their class. And that's what caused the grade to go up. I thought about giving a B-, but I'm like, no, there's just too many question marks. There's just, and that's why I kept it at a C+. But it was like a C before. Now it's a C+, and it's a quality class. They were picking up one and a good player away from being better. And I don't know that John Anthony Hall would have been that guy. Like, yeah, you could have got him, and he's ranked, but like, he doesn't add to the receiver room what it's missing. And he would just be another number 2, number 3 type of guy, good football player, but he wouldn't have moved the needle. He just would have made people feel better because of his ranking. But that's not, it's more of that high level kid. There's no Cam Williams in this class, right? There's not even a Jaden Greathouse in this class. There's no, Chase Claypool in this class. And that's what it's missing. And if you could have got that, then we'd be having a way different conversation. But my point is, when you're only that guy away, it's not a bad class.
Sure.
Now you just got to go out and get that guy next year. And
right.
that's going to be the key for them.
Yeah, the wide receiver room leaves a lot of room for excitement, the way that I look at it. I love what Jerome Bettis Jr. did his senior year. Because his junior year, to your point, Brian, he was just kind of like one of the more athletic guys on his team that was just playing receiver because he could catch really well. In his senior year, he turned into a good receiver. He did a better job at stacking routes, which is something that he wasn't doing because he doesn't have elite speed. He doesn't have that speed where you see a lot of high school kids that have that, and they can just blow by kids. Yeah. And that's not what Jerome Bettis Jr. has. But I will say, out of all, the one that I'm most excited to kind of watch and keep track of his Notre Dame career is Antavius Richardson. Because I think he's a guy with, to your point, the toolbox that he has makes me really excited to see what he's going to look like, come sophomore year. He's not going to be a guy where, you know how we're talking about, where's Cam Williams been this year? Where's Micah Gilbert been this year? I don't view Scrap Richardson that way, but I'm excited to see what he's going to be like after he develops more into a wide receiver. And kind of seems like, hey, like sophomore year, let's see what he does in that spring game. That's where I'm going to be watching him for. So I'm excited to see what he does.
So one thing that's nice about this receiving class is they're all early enrollees, and that's going to be huge for them for different reasons. For Jerome and Elijah, it's going to be more about, I can't wait to get them in the strength program. So Elijah needs to get stronger. They both need to get a little bit more juice.
Yeah.
Right. You hope it can come. We've seen guys do that before. A lot of guys get a little extra juice when they get to college. The other one is Scrap. It's more, yes, he needs to get stronger because he's a skinny kid.
Yeah.
But with Scrap, it's going to be great for him to be with the other wideouts during January workouts, during February workouts, during March workouts, and getting into spring ball. He's going to get a whole lot more. He's going to have some rough moments as a receiver in spring ball. But I'm telling you, when we're at spring practices, if they let us in any spring practices, there are going to be some times you're like, he's just going to say, go run a post route, and he's going to know what to do. And you're like, okay, that looked good.
Yeah.
And then they're going to ask him to run a comeback route, and it's going to take 8 steps for him to get out of his break because he doesn't know how to do it yet.
Right.
But there's going to be some moments you're like, oh, okay, yep, that's what when the other stuff figures it out, that's going to be a package. And that's why it's really important that all 3 of those guys are going to be early enrollees. They all need that extra time. It's going to be big for all of them. And that's the only thing I'd say. Maybe Scrap could work into the rotation in some regard because of that. You know what I mean? Those are that extra time, but more likely than not, they're all going to need a year before they're really ready to make an impact that's not injury related, meaning, people get hurt.
Yeah.
Whereas like Leonard Moore kind of let everybody know that, hey, I'm going to play this year the minute he got here. I don't know that any of these guys are going to be that.
Sure.
Benjamin Morrison was that way. Christian Gray was that way at those positions. Jaden Greathouse was that way at wide receiver, where he's like, okay, he's going to play. And you talk about it, it's like, look, a guy like Antavius Richardson, he's more athletic than Jaden Greathouse was. He's more athletic than what Rico Flores was. But those guys were seasoned, like 3,000 career receiving yards in high school guys, which is why they were more ready to play as freshmen. And could potentially need a little bit more time.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving the needle forward here, Bryan, talk about the tight end and what this elite tight end can do for this class and what the outlook is for him being in here.
We're talking about James Flanagan. He's one of the best tight ends in the country, in my opinion. He's a different type of tight end than a lot of the other quote unquote top tight ends. They looked at some different players, the Waverly kid, Andrew Olesh. They're more of the new school receivers that line up in the slot and move around and kind of, this is a Michael Mayer type of guy. That if you want to comp, James Flanagan is like Michael Mayer with a little bit more speed. He's not as polished as Michael was coming out of high school. Michael Mayer was ready to play right now as a route runner, as a pass catcher. James is still pretty raw as a route runner, but he's 6'5", 230, plays both ways, punishing blocker. Very good hands, good body control, catches the ball really well, Trev, but he's got a gear in him that we don't get to see a whole lot at tight end. Occasionally they'll let him run a seam route and you're like, whoo, man. But this kid's just an excellent athlete he's a great hockey player. I think he does. He said he broke his dad's, I think I have to ask Ryan, but I think it was shot put or discus. I forget which one it was. I'd have to ask Ryan, but he broke his dad's state record last year. So this isn't a kid that's playing football year round. And so by the time he gets to Notre Dame and football becomes his only thing athletically, you're going to see his game take off. But this is a kid that, there's 2 kids on this team, this offensive class that I think could play right away. And it's Will Black and James Flanagan. And he is a guy that complements last year's tight end really well, because Jack Larson is more of a slot, move around, movement tight end. James Flanagan is basically, he blocks like Cooper Flanagan, but he's got the pass catching potential production-wise of a Michael Mayer, a 40, 50-plus guy as a pass catcher. He's got a little bit more juice than Michael had. He's not quite as strong as Michael was, but he's a better blocker than what Michael was coming in. And This kid's a dude. He's a top 100 player for me. It's funny. He's one of those weird ones because there are some recruiting services that love this kid, and there are others that, for whatever reason, don't, and I don't know why. So when you look at his recruiting profile, him and Jadon Blair have two of the more odd recruiting profiles in this class. Let me pull it up because I think Rivals recently dropped him out of their top 300. And let's see here, James Flanagan. Did I put that one in? No, I haven't put that one in yet. So Rivals has him ranked out of their top 300. 247 on 3 and ESPN all have between 105 and 111. Now, I forget which one it was, but one of them recently had him in the top 100, so they've dropped him down a little bit. This is a top 100 kid for me. Like, just no-brainer. But if I have him as a no-brainer top 100 kid and you got him at 105, 107, 111, that's kind of splitting hairs a little bit. We're not way off. Like, I can't believe they have him outside top 100. Where's he ranked? 105. Those idiots. Like, that, no. Then I'm like 180, 190. I'm like, guys, you're off 100 spots on this kid. You're off 10, 15 spots. We're on the same page, right? And then Rivals just drops him out of the top 300 altogether. It was just like, okay, that's kind of weird and random. But they missed on him, in my opinion. This is a dude. This is a top player. This is an impact player. This is a kid that could help you. I'll just be shocked if he's not playing as a freshman in some capacity. I'll be a little surprised. I mean, maybe you got Cooper Flanagan. You've got Eli Raritan coming back. You'll have Jack Larson. Maybe he doesn't play a whole lot, but I just have a feeling that this is going to be a kid that's going to be hard to keep off the field next year. He could use – the only counter to that would be he could use a little bit of development in the technical part of the game, which is harder for a guy that doesn't play football year-round. He's not going to 7-on-7 camps because he's playing hockey or he's in track. He plays both ways. He's a pretty good defensive end, too. I don't think he's as good of a defensive end at Notre Dame as he is a tight end, but if there was ever a need, he could play for Notre Dame at tight end or defensive end. He wouldn't be the impact guy as a tight end, though, and that's why I like him a tight end. But as a blocker, I could see him helping you out right now. I mean, he's stronger than what Cooper Flanagan was coming out of high school. He's about the same size, and he's a better athlete. And Cooper played a little as a freshman, so I could see that. I could. He's really good.
Yeah, he's a really, really good blocker. I think his success on the defensive line kind of helps that, honestly. I mean, sometimes you see, especially you mentioned it with those new age tight ends, like they don't really like to stick their nose in there and block too much. They like to be that finesse type of receiver, and he's more of that. I don't want to call him old school, but he's just more of like a traditional. That's fair.
Yeah. And that's how Mayer was, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's partly why Mayer's not, like, Michael Mayer hasn't done a whole lot in the NFL now, but if Michael Mayer was playing in the 1980s and 1990s, he'd be a dude.
Yeah.
In the NFL, in my opinion. And he was in college.
Oh, yeah.
So really, really good player. Really good player.
Yeah. Absolutely. Let's dive into what you had brought up, kind of spearheading this offensive class a little bit, and talk about the offensive line pickups that Notre Dame got in 2025 and your breakdown of those individual guys.
So I give the class as a whole, the offensive line class as a whole, an A-. It's the same as last year's class. And the reason I give it an A- is because I do think the bottom of it is not quite as high as the top of it. And I think behind Will Black, the next two guys are more of the low floor, high ceiling type of guys. And the way that I rank the 4-man class, it's Will Black, number 1, is a 5-star, top 25 caliber player. I think he's the number 2 overall player in the country, according to On3. I believe he's still that high, right? They have him ranked number 2. Rivals now has him as a 5-star, ranked number 19. So I'm now in line with them. It's funny. Usually it's the other way around. They eventually become in line with what we had early. But in this instance, because I admitted why I just didn't have enough film. I couldn't do it. I mean, I loved to make him a 5-star like everybody else was, but I just didn't have the film to do it. And I have that now. And he's a dude. He's a top 250 player or top 25 player. I have Owen Strebig next as a top 150 player. Big, strong, physical kid. I'll talk about him. Matty Augustine's more of a borderline top 250 guy with a super high ceiling. And then Cam Herron's the polar opposite. Cam Herron might be the second best high school offensive lineman in this group. But the how does his skill set project to the next level is lower. And so that's kind of where I look at it, man, is this there's a little bit too much need to work in this group. There's only the one, okay, that's a dude kind of guy. I think you need kind of a second of those guys to be an A, whether it's a upside or whatever. And so I went A minus, but that's still, they're a top 5 to 7 offensive line group. I mean, and I'm being a little bit picky at having an A minus, to be honest with you, because I'm trying to be, okay, let me be critical, not just, you get an A, you get an, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
so I get A minus. I originally had him as an A, but as I, put a more critical eye to it, I did bring it down a tad. I also think that the one thing that's different for, I wonder if Will Black might have a similar issue that Joe Alt had initially when he came to Notre Dame, which is that was a big jump in competition. Like, I can't stand when people will bring a kid's grade down because the competition he plays. That's irrelevant. You're a 4.5 or you're a 4.5. It doesn't matter. What competition matters, however, is it helps with your transition. When you are playing against the kind of competition that Kingston Viliama also plays, it's gonna be so much easier for you to transition into college, because the jump between what you face and what you're in high school and what you're facing now is not nearly as stark as what Joe Alt faced at Totino in Minnesota, and what Will Black will face at Rosemary Hall. Now, that league has a lot more Division I players now than it used to, but it's going to be a jump. Same with Matty Augustine. So that also factored into my grade is these guys might need a little bit more of a transition time. That's what kind of happened with Gerby a little bit this year. Is Gerby Lambert, again, he was just so much bigger and stronger. Had Gerby played in Ohio at the high level, if he was at St. Ignatius, or if he would have played at one of the big Jersey Catholic schools, or if he would have played out in LA, he'd be way more ready to play as a freshman. Doesn't change his talent and upside at all. It's just how quickly can a guy get ready to play. And that's kind of how I look at it. But I like, so obviously Will Black's a dude. Owen Strebig's a guy that I like as well. He's a little bit more of a higher floor, lower ceiling guy. Big physical kid, 6'7", 6'8", depend. I mean, he's listed at 6'7" by Notre Dame. Same height as Will Black. I've seen those two standing next to each other. Owen Strebig's taller than Will Black. They're both monsters. There's this photo that was going around when Deuce was still committed, and it was Deuce Knight standing next to the 3 offensive linemen. And Deuce is like 6'5", and they're just like towering over him. Owen Strebig, the change for Owen for me has gone from, I thought he could be a right tackle, maybe a left tackle in high school. As I watch his senior film, I think he's probably more of a slide inside and be a power guard like Sullivan Absher. Could play right tackle, but I think could also end up being a guard. So that's really the change for me. I still view him as a top 150 caliber player. If he can work on his footwork and maybe get a little bit more agile, bend a little bit better, I think he could be even better. That's why the upside grade is 4.5 star upside grade. He's a really good football player. Like him, Matty Augustine's a little bit different than Owen, where Owen is about the floor and Matty's about the ceiling. This is still a kid that's only been playing football for a few years. If you go watch the film of when he first started playing football, he was like this really super skinny kid that like would roll his shirt up and show his abs. Now he looks more like a lineman. He looks great because he was a basketball player. He went to Brunswick to play basketball, and then obviously they finally convinced him to be a football player, and it's worked out well for him. And big kid, 287. He handles my concern with him was how would he handle the big jump in weight, and I think he's handled that pretty well. He still moves well. His issues are more technical. He's got to develop a better feel for the game, in my opinion, on the edge. He's got to learn the nuances of playing offensive line. He's got to learn to use his hands better. He's got to learn to bend a little bit more at the knees as opposed to kind of being a little bit tight in the knees. But the thing is, you watch him move, he's not tight athletically in the knee. Like his body's not tight. It's a technique thing. It's because he's still kind of new to football. But the tools are there, man. I mean, he's 6'6". He's got very long arms. Great wingspan. He's athletic. He can change direction with relative ease when his technique is right. You can, because like if a guy has 20 pass sets and 5 of them are the really smooth and quick and the other 15 aren't, he doesn't have an athletic limitation because you don't, like if I'm a 4.9 40 in my heyday, I'm faster than that, but like now I'm a 6 flat. Well, put it like this: if I ran a 6.5 now at my age, I'm not going to just have that one. I felt really good, so I ran a 4.5. I'm going to be 6'5" or 6'3" or 6'7". You know, it's like if you can show really smooth change of direction half your snaps, you're capable of doing it for all your snaps, but you've got some sort of technical issue that's keeping you from doing that, right? And so that's kind of where I see Maddie. Maddie's got a lot of technical work that's needed, a lot more experience playing the position is needed, but I love the length. He's got some really good pop too, Trevor. He's got some really Will Black has some pop. Will Black's an elite athlete for that size. I mean, he is incredibly long, incredibly athletic, strong. Like you watch him work around on traps and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a 6'7", 300-pound kid. His frame is massive. He's going to be 320 when it's all said and done. Like he is a monster, but he's athletic. Maddie's got some of that in him. He's not as advanced as Will, but he's athletic. He's a good athlete when he's right athletically, but he's got some meanness to him that I did not expect a former basketball player to have. With all due respect to you basketball players, when I think basketball, I don't really think guy that's going to play with an edge. But I guess I should. I mean, I should be like, he's more of a Charles Oakley. Maybe he was more of a Charles Oakley, Bill Laimbeer type of basketball player. You know what I mean? Like
an old school guy.
Yeah, but he's got some attitude to him. And then honestly, I'll be honest with you. This is human nature. Sometimes I look at a kid and I wonder how tough that kid is. I'm not gonna lie to you. And I saw Maddie do his press conference. He's got his hairs all, and he's wearing a suit. And I'm just like, is this kid really like going to be nasty? And then you pop on the film and you're like, oh, okay, all right. This kid's got some nastiness to him.
Yeah.
And you're like, boy, this kid's got some tools. He's going to need time. Like I think Will can help. Will Black can help you right now. I think Owen Strebid might be able to help you in your first couple years.
Yeah.
Matty Augustine might need some time, but if the light goes on, oh yeah, he's got some tools. He's got a lot of tools. And then the last one for me is Cam Herron. Love this kid's high school film. His highlight tip's like 14 minutes long. It's ridiculous. Notre Dame's recruiting him as a center. Maddie and Will Black are, to me, more tackles that could play guard. But if you can play tackle, more often than not, you can play guard. I mean, that's in Notre Dame's system. That's just how it works. Not all guards can play tackle. So those two guys are tackles. I think Owen's more of a right tackle guard, and then Cam Herron's more of a center. Tough kid. Really, he's not real. His long speed and long athleticism is great. Like he's not a great like puller, but his short area quickness is really good, and he works to the second level with really good quickness. So he's got some of that. Really tough kid, strong, super long arms. Lot to like about him. Plays with a great motor. Seems like a real smart player. You can just see the way he plays the game. You talk to people about him. There's a lot of intelligence to his game. There's a lot to like about him, but Maddie grades as a top 250 guy based on tools. Owen Strebid is a top 150 guy, size, power, tools. This kid I grade as a 3.5-star kid with 4-star upside. And the big concern I have is just size, because he's already kind of a thicker kid. He's listed at 6'2", 276. He's got apparently, really long arms. You can see how long they are. What we were told about his arm length was insane, but I just wonder how my fear is that he's going to have a Zeke Carell problem. And if you remember watching Zeke Carell in high school, he was 6'2.5", 265, athletic, quick. But Zeke had a hard time staying healthy as they put 30, 40 pounds on him. And he got tightened up a little bit, and he just couldn't stay healthy. Trevor Ruland had a similar problem. Trevor Ruland was a really twitchy high school lineman, but Trevor Ruland is one of the few guys I've ever given like a 3.5-star grade to with a 5-star upside. Because it was like, if he can hold up size-wise, that guy had great film. And Trevor was a try-hard guy in college, but when they put all that weight on him, he lost some of the explosiveness. And then also his body broke down a little bit more because he wasn't a naturally 300-pound guy. And so his body and that's what happened to Zeke a little bit at Notre Dame also, although he had a really nice year at NC State. But that's the only question I have on this kid, Trevor, is can he hold up in everything? You love his toughness. You love his want to. You love his short area quickness. You love his length. You love his punch. You love his football IQ. Like, as Jay Lamont said in the chat, that he wants to be at Notre Dame. I love all those things. At the very least, this kid's going to be a great rotation guy, a great backup center guard that I'm sure glad you had him in a pinch. if the size can hold up and he can play at 295, 300 pounds and still be quick, still be all those things, then I think he'll have a chance to be a starter down the road. Because the toughness is there, the length is there. I just worry about the size. Can he hold up? Can he put on enough weight to play? Can he hold it? That's my big question with Cam. And that's one of the also reasons when your number 4 guy is like that, that's going to drag the grade down just a little bit overall.
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, I really like this offensive line class. I'm in the same boat as you. I am. One of the highlights that I saw of Will Black, and now it gets you excited, but it doesn't really have a whole lot of translation into him being an offensive lineman at Notre Dame. But a testament to his athleticism is they threw him a screen pass in high school, and he took it 49 yards to the house. And you don't really do that with a whole lot of not athletic tackles.
And he was moving.
He was, man.
He was moving.
Yeah, moving. So leaves a lot of room for excitement. But what you talked about with Matty Augustine, I really liked, because the thing that kind of popped out on film to me is sometimes it almost feels like he goes out of his way to finish blocks. Like, not that it's a detriment to the play, but I was with you when I saw that he was a basketball player and somebody that was more athletic. He was a lot thinner when he was starting to play football, and man, that guy like enjoys mauling people when he gets the chance. And so it's exciting to see, man. I'm really excited to see what this offensive line class does. But I know, Bryan, you wanted to talk about overall offensive grade and the grade for this class. So what say you?
So the offensive class is the one that brings down the overall grade from a potential top 5 class, because it's just not a top 5 offensive class. It's just not. And it's a good offensive class. I give it a B. It's a B offensive class. You got a excellent, with a chance to be even better, because there's some potential, there's some upside in this class, Trev, that I really like. And so, there's a lot of tools to work with, but right now there's a lot of projection in this class. And it's hard for me to view a class as an A class when as much projection is needed. You need Scrap to do this. You need Elijah to do that. You've got to get better here. You hope that this gets better there. And it's hard for me to say, B plus, A minus. There's a lot of tools here. This has a chance to be an excellent offensive line class. It's got a chance to be you've got one of the best tight ends in the country. I love the running back. You've got a quarterback with a lot of tools, receivers with a lot of tools, but also quarterback needs a lot of work. Receivers need a lot of work, and few of your linemen need some work. And so that's why I give it a B. And B for me is an outstanding class that's top 15 caliber. This is one of the 15 or so best offensive classes in the country. It is. It's just not elite top 5. You're going to win a championship because of this group based on what it is now. But there's a lot of upside in this group, and that's what I like about it. But it's going to need a lot of work. And why that matters, Trevor, is because when you have guys that need a lot of work, and like your class is filled with those type of guys, your success rate is usually lower on those type of guys. Some of them are going to hit, but you're not going to. And this is where you get into the stars debate. Well, you need you don't need 5-star recruits. You need 5-star players, right? And 5-star players can be 2 stars, they can be 3 stars, they can be 4 stars, or 5 stars coming out of high school. Joe Alt was a 3-star player coming out of high school. Kyle Hamilton, when he committed to Notre Dame, was a 3-star player. Eventually, they figured it out, got it right. ESPN didn't think Quentin Nelson was a top 100 recruit coming to high school. I mean, Rival Studies a 5-star. Like it's nice to get those guys that are 5 stars, but I don't care about that. I care about 5-star talent, and that's why I keep in. What annoys me is when people look at a player and see 3-star and say, "Well, he can't play." It's nonsense. And then they give you the whole percentage thing. But if it's a percentage, then you're telling me that some 3 stars become 5 stars, correct? And so that's where the star ranking debate drives me nuts. Well, I don't care about percentages. I care about, does this guy have that type of potential? Having said that, if you're talking about building a roster and not looking at where on the micro level, it annoys the crap out of me when people talk about he's a 3-star, so I'm not going to be excited about it. Annoys the crap out of me. On the macro level, big picture, if you have a class filled with 3-star kids or even 4-star kids that are projectables, right? They need a lot of work, like a Scrap Richardson, right? He's a 4-star, but he's a 4-star that needs a lot of work. The hit rate's going to be lower. the odds of you hitting on as high of a level is, if you filled a roster with all 5 stars, is going to be lower. I've never debated that. It's star ranking is not determinative of an individual player. That's why I say they don't matter. They don't. You throw a star on a guy, it doesn't make him a better player. You take a star away from a guy, it doesn't make him a worse player. His talent is what it is. But when you take a lot of guys, not that are 3 stars, but more that are projectables, guys that need work, low floor, high ceiling, whatever their ranking is, that's where I say your hit rate's likely going to be a little lower. And that's my concern about this offensive class. But sometimes a lot of them do hit. And we've already seen that at Notre Dame with the last couple of classes. So that's where I look at it and say, that's what keeps it from being a higher graded class. But it's not the average not top 25 like some people are saying it is. I like this offensive class. It's just not on the same level as the defense. And so it's a good addition. We'll talk about the two-way grades here in a bit, but that's where I'm at with the offensive class. It's a good offensive haul. It's got the potential to be really good, but it's going to take some time.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I'm with that analysis. I mean, I think you said it best when you said on offense, Notre Dame has 2 guys that might be able to contribute in their first year on campus. And not saying that this is just like a science experiment of like a bunch of projects that they're going to have to work on and maybe their senior year they're going to contribute. It's nothing like that. But they do have very limited guys that have the potential to come in and make an impact right away, which is fine. And I think we're going to dive into like some reasons as to why when we look at the 2024, 2025 kind of recruiting comparison as a whole, you know what I mean? But no, I agree. I would have the offensive class as a B as well, because there's a lot of good. There's a lot of good, but there are the ifs. If Herron can keep the weight on and play at the same athleticism, if Scrap Richardson can make the transition to wide receiver, if Jerome Bettis Jr. can continue ascending the way that he did his senior year of high school. So I'm with you. I agree. Well, that's going to do it for the offensive portion of this recruiting breakdown. But don't go anywhere. We're still going to dive into the defense, but you guys know what to do in the meantime. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. Share this podcast. Make sure you guys go to boards.irishbreakdown.com to see all of our exclusive content, and that's how you're going to be able to stay in the know. So make sure you go to boards.irishbreakdown.com.